and Tanya, and of course the wider SALDA team for giving us this opportunity. It's a privilege to present to all of you today on the critical topic that you're seeing on your screens right now. So on behalf of IQVIA MedTech and the broader IQVIA team who have joined me today, who I'll shortly introduce to you, a big welcome to everybody to this session where we have some subject matter experts who will unpack real world evidence for you guys in the context of the IVD market. So without further delay, let me introduce the team to you as follows. So we've got Michelle Bulliard, who leads our global real world solutions team, who will be taking you through RWE. And then we've got Sue Bailey as well, who leads the South African business from a research and development solutions perspective, who will take you through the regulatory landscape. We're also joined by Dr. Saurabh Kumar, who leads our health economics and outcomes research division in the real world solution space, who's joined by Risha Goyal, who is the principal for health economics and outcomes research for IQVIA MedTech, and Brenda Sriskantha, who is our director and portfolio strategy lead for real world solutions within MedTech. So what's in store for you today from an agenda perspective? So first off, just a brief welcome and some introductions, which we've already covered. Following this, Michelle and Brenda will delve into real world evidence and what it means to you guys and how you can add value to your businesses. We'll then discuss a few key elements from a regulatory perspective, which Sue Bailey and Michelle will take you through, which impacts RWE studies, followed by a very relevant subject in the South African context, and that's health economics data and literature review. Once we've covered all of that, we'll then open and end the session with Q&A, permitting on time. I see we've been granted an extra sort of 10 to 15 minutes. So thanks, Tanya and Sarah, for that. So if we go on to the next slide, and for the folk on the slide who perhaps don't know who IQVIA is and who we are in Africa. So we're the result of a merger in 2016 between Quintiles, the clinical research organization, and IMS Health, who largely played in healthcare data. And in South Africa, we are well represented with over 1,000 employees, focusing on only pharma, consumer health, and medtech, and delivering solutions across research and development, information, data, contract sales forces, consulting services, and technology. As you can see by the map in front of you, we are heavily invested across Africa and have offices in all key territories and regions, making us probably the only partner with the ability to enable your African expansion, if that is on your agenda or part of your future strategy. So I'm going to hand over to Michelle very quickly, who will wrap up the introduction from the next slide. Thanks, Michelle.
Great, thank you, Andrew.
Oh, sorry, one more for me. Brief overview very quickly on our information services offering. It's just something that we would like to highlight if data interests you, and data is something that you see as an investment on the horizon. We can assist you with data and information focused on market share and pharmacy channel dynamics, covering 90% plus of the market. And then as well as, which is complementary to that, is our procedural audit, which gives you insights into the private sector procedural landscape within South Africa with about 70% coverage. So now I will hand over to Michelle, who will complete the introduction. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Andrew. Can you just confirm that you can hear me okay? Can you hear me? Yes, okay, fantastic. I see all the thumbs up.
Yeah,
Hi,
all good.
everyone. Delighted to be here. My name is Michelle Bouliard. I'm the Vice President and Global Head of IQVIA MedTech, Real World Solutions. So looking after all of the ways we can use real world evidence for medical devices, including in vitro diagnostic tests. And just really before going into really the content that we want to discuss with you today. Just the last slide around our capabilities here is that within IQVIA, we're a global organization, but we're very much involved in the development of in vitro diagnostic tests and across the whole product life cycle. So when we look at the services we provide really early on in helping, in the design of your diagnostic studies in the pre-market space, and all of the regulatory consulting around that. And already when we're talking about real world evidence, we're already supporting in building out biobanks for our clients if needed in the around the assay that they're developing. We support all the regulatory consulting within South Africa, but also at a global level, and then support with all of the analytic validation of the diagnostic test. We also have our global central lab to support with all of the analysis as well. And when we're talking about real world evidence, we're also now more and more conducting what we call as non-interventional observational studies in the pre-market space. And we'll talk a little bit further about this when we're going through some of the regulatory updates as well. And then we support customers with regulatory filings, commercialization, supporting them get their product into the market, and then conducting all of the post-marketing clinical utility studies to demonstrate the ongoing utility and value of the diagnostic tests in the market. And just one other thing we're doing as well is we work closely with our diagnostic customers. If they are collaborating with the pharma company to develop a companion diagnostic test, for example, we can work with both of them, bringing also over our pharma expertise to support our diagnostic clients. So with that, we can already move into the next session, which I will also be continuing on as we look at the regulatory. So just one more slide also just to close out in our experience. So talking about the capabilities we have within the real world space, we've run over 100 IVD and companion diagnostic studies. And many of the studies now that we see ongoing are in more novel, also early cancer detection studies. We've enrolled over 50,000 patients in one early cancer diagnostic study using real world evidence, and it's a pre-market study. So our group are really specialized and dedicated in generating real world evidence for diagnostic tests. We also have expertise in working directly with our global central lab for the IVD studies. And one of the things also for IVDs, especially as we move more and more to point of care testing, we also have experience in how we integrate multiple different data sources. So if you're collecting diagnostic information from a point of care where the patient is, with additional lab data, with additional physician data as well, and we're able to also integrate different sources of data together. And we're also bring on board all of our medical device center of excellence in these studies as well. So as we move on to the next section, I'm going to hand over to Brenda, who will just open up talking about the value of real world evidence.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Can I just check you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Brenda. Yeah.
Brilliant, thanks. So just on to the next slide. I wanted to start off by level setting on what we mean when we're talking about real world evidence and real world data. since stakeholders have many evidentiary needs and we're all looking for real world evidence across the total product life cycle, from developing them, bringing them to market and to commercializing them, what exactly is real world evidence? And this slide describes ultimately it's clinical evidence derived from the analysis of real world data. And if we just start off then with some definitions, and I've taken these from the FDA. There are many different definitions out there, but this seemed to kind of resonate as well. So when we define real world data, this is data relating to patient health status and or the delivery of healthcare. And it's routinely collected from many different sources. And on the next slide, I'll actually be speaking more to what these different types of sources are. This data is not typically collected in conventional randomized controlled trials, and the data is then processed and analyzed. If I click again, it's processed and analyzed to generate the actual real world evidence. And when we're talking about real world evidence, this is the clinical evidence regarding the usage and potential benefits or risks of a medical product or an IVD derived from the analysis of this real world data. And this evidence can be used to support claims and address evidence demands of our multi-stakeholders. Just moving on then to the next slide, just wanted to draw in a bit more on real world data sources. The use of real world data is increasing rapidly, and as an industry, we're leveraging real world data more than ever. Using sources such as these. So you can see electronic health records, hospital data, pharmacy data, registries, and claims data. These are actually the more traditional data sources, providing us with significant insights into signs, symptoms, tests, and treatments. This, though, is kind of shifting. So we're now seeing a shift into more innovative and new types of data that we can be drawing in. So with the ever increasing focus on patient centricity, we're now seeing a new stream of RWE and patient level data. This is called patient generated health data. And this incorporates more of that direct data that can be collected from the patient in the home setting. So this really expands our understanding of the complex factors involved in the health, safety, and effectiveness of medical products, including IVDs. And just quickly before I hand it back over to Michelle, this really summarizes why the use of real world evidence is increasing and is expanding in the healthcare arena. And there is ever increasing interest in RWE. At the top, you can see that in this JAMA publication, that the future of registries in the era of RWE for medical devices is increasing, and regulators are increasingly putting in place more guidance frameworks and legislations on incorporating RWE in regulatory decision making, and Michelle will be talking to this a bit later on. What we're also seeing today is an increased availability of RWD or real world data. And I just took this reference coming from the FDA, in which they say that the use of computers, mobile devices, wearables, and other biosensors to gather and store huge amounts of health related data has been rapidly accelerating. So this is again driving the market landscape in the use of RWE. And as in the industry, we're getting much better at doing the analysis of these huge data sets, which is also increasing the interest in RWE. We're also seeing now in the medical device and IVD space an ever expanding applications. So we're more and more using RWE across the total product life cycle from concept to patient. And you can see here a very nice example from South Africa, where there is more of a spotlight on RWE, including how it played a crucial part in the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is a significant shift in that there is a much greater acceptance in the use of RWE, and there is a much greater need also. And with that, I'll now hand over back to Michelle, who'll speak more about the evolving regulatory landscape.
Thank you, Brenda. So I don't want to overwhelm you with this slide, but it's more just to give you a sense of what is happening around the world. And it's really, really interesting now when we look at the regulatory landscape for real world evidence around the world. All regulators now, many of the regulators are putting into place new guidelines, new standards, new regulations on the use of real world evidence for regulatory decision making. And that regulatory decision making can mean that the real world evidence is used in the pre-market space for the development of the diagnostic test, or in the post-market space for the ongoing clinical performance and safety of the diagnostic test. So here's just an example, and it's probably more just to focus on, if we look at the dates as well, these are all recent, and this is not exhaustive at all. We know that in South Africa there will be updated regulations coming into place from SAFRA. But if you look just globally, all across the Asia Pac and Middle East, we have a lot of new guidance coming out of the big regulators from Japan, from China, from Australia. As well. And then also in Europe, we just had last month the big in vitro diagnostic regulation, really massive regulation, big change in, over 25 years, now requiring total life cycle product management of IVDs. And interestingly, in this regulation, they've upclassified 80% of diagnostic tests now been upclassified in the risk classification of the device, requiring also additional evidence across the full total product life cycle as well. The US is really, kind of taking, big steps and leaps in using real world evidence. This is built into their congressional law now on looking at ways. And the reason they're building it into their law is they need to look at ways of how can you bring innovative tests, diagnostic tests, medical devices into the market, but speed up access to the patients for these medical devices as well. And there's also a lot of new international guidance coming out, which I'll be going through some of them a little bit later as well. So really the takeaway message here is that I think we're now at really kind of a pivotal point where Brenda has highlighted there's a lot more interest, but we're getting much better at accessing the data under the right conditions and applying the right analytic methods to generate high quality evidence that before we couldn't do, to demonstrate the value of your diagnostic test. And then just on that topic of value, we move on to the next slide. Is here, I just wanted to show you how when you look at all of your stakeholders, all of them have questions to ask around the use of the diagnostic test. And they all have different questions. And what we're doing now is looking at, can we answer these questions through real world evidence and do it in a smart way? Maybe answer all of their questions under one study design as well. We know regulators now, as I've highlighted, are more and more interested in looking at the ongoing total product life cycle performance, the benefit risk of the test as it's in development and comes into the market. Increasing, we're seeing now, and probably more for the more novel and more complex assays coming into development, is for reimbursement as well. Payers also now looking at the value of this diagnostic test and also want to assess how it's being used in a real world setting. Of course, the prescribers of this test, they want to make informed decisions. They want to improve the care of their patient, understand what are their choices that they have. And also what we see is many of the providers, the physicians, very much interested in thought leadership and want to be involved in publications. And also real world evidence is a very nice way to engage them and to have them involved in publishing and presenting at congresses as well. And patients, more and more, we're actually even seeing come from regulators. They're saying that patients now have a greater voice and a greater say in how their care is administered. So they also want to understand what choices they will have as well. And then, of course, the industry, you hear the industry is, you also want to meet all of your performance criteria, establish the clinical utility of the diagnostic test coming into the market, and of course, secure reimbursement, market access as well, and also generate publications to all of your stakeholders. So we're looking at now is, can all of these questions that are being asked be answered through well-designed, well-conducted real-world evidence as well? So if we move on to the next section, Andrew. So one of the fundamentals as well in generating real world evidence is also, of course, navigating the complex regulatory landscape and compliance with the ongoing regulations. So in this next section, I'll be co-sharing with Sue as well, is we just want to give you a highlight of some of the more updated guidance or standards that are coming into effect as well. So if we move on to the next slide. So here is, I thought this was a nice one to start with. This is coming from the Global Harmonization Working Party. Previously, they were called the Asian Harmonization Working Party. And they have published a draft guide. It was open for public comments. I think that's now closed it, on IVD clinical performance studies. And in this guidance, they're saying that these studies should be designed in a way to maximize the relevance of the data whilst minimizing potential biases. And they go on to say that the majority of IVD clinical performance studies follow an observational design. And they're saying that this design is common, it's appropriate for IVDs because these studies are not used to determine patient management as they're done in parallel to routine diagnostic testing. For these types of studies, the specimens are generally using already archived specimens or leftover specimens, or sometimes if there is a specimen collection from the patient in the study, it's really minimal burden. It could be, say, for example, a urine sample or a blood test. And then these specimens that are collected are used for study purposes, not for making treatment decisions. And on the next slide, still on the same document, I just wanted to highlight, they included quite a nice flow chart is to help you navigate which type of observational study design can be used to best answer my research question. And they go into a lot more detail, but they provide guidance on observational designs, cross-sectional, so just at one point in time, collecting the data and looking at what's happening. Longitudinal follow-up, maybe more so with the clinical utility studies, but retrospective and prospective. So even smart ways, can we go to existing data sets to collect the data as well? So nice guidance. I don't have an updated when it will be finalized, but the fact that I think the public comments were closed last year, we should anticipate to see something coming up this year. On to the next slide, just wanted to also draw attention to the IMDRF. So I was actually looking, and they don't really have many updated guidance on IVD studies. They do have guidance, but they've been around now for probably, I think, maybe a good, 7, 8, 9 years. So I think I would anticipate we may start seeing something more coming from them. But one thing to highlight is now with the much greater focus around the globe on more post-market surveillance as well, we may expect to see more requirements on post-market surveillance from the IMDRF. And I also just wanted to highlight that, so the previous guideline that I presented from the Global Harmonisation Working Party, this includes South Africa. South Africa is a member of the GHWP. So, the GHWP is an affiliate member of the IMDRF. So just they all tie very closely into what's coming out of the IMDRF. Moving on to the next slide. I also wanted to highlight here, you're probably all familiar with the ISO 20916, but this is just an important standard in the conduct of observational studies. So this is the good clinical practice for our diagnostic studies. This was published back in 2019, so still relatively new considering the time it takes to develop an ISO standard and publish it. And within this guidance, they give a really nice flow chart on how do you decide or select, is my study going to be a non-interventional study, a real-world study, so observational study using real-world evidence, or interventional. And it very much matches the previous guidance as well that I just highlighted, that you're collecting specimens, using archive specimens, or the specimens collected are minimal risk to the patient, and no treatment decision will be made. And this guidance will help you also. This can be used in the pre-market development of your diagnostic tests. We move on to the next slide is just a few words on going into around safety and performance. I don't know if we advanced, and I'm maybe not seeing. Oh, we have it here. Okay, great. So yeah, post-market surveillance there's the ISO standard 13485. This applies also to in vitro diagnostic medical devices as well. And what really they're saying is that company must really weave in surveillance of their test throughout the full development. And you need to plan for it. You need to actually do your active surveillance and then do ongoing checks of post-market surveillance on an ongoing basis. And this is where now we're tying in how can we use real-world evidence to optimally ensure we're compliant and following the standards of the ISO guidance as well. So we move on to the next slide. And here I'm going to hand over to Sue. Thank you, Sue.
Thanks, Michelle, and hi, good morning, everybody. Sorry for joining a bit late. I'm Sue Bailey, and I'm responsible for our clinical trial delivery at IQVIA for South Africa. So we traditionally work a lot more in the commercial early phase stage, but just you know, we see there's a lot of development happening in the diagnostic space sort of globally, and we know that there's going to be, well, we know there's a working group working with SACRA and Sarah and others to sort of talk to SAPRA about what we can do more efficiently in South Africa. So just sort of some general comments about the regulatory environment in South Africa for running trials. I mean, we run it under South African GCP practices. Those published clinical trial guidelines, they were recently updated. I think it was towards the end of last year, to October 2021, they were released. There is also a medical, devices guidance within that, but that's, I think, being what I alluded to is trying to make that more relevant for this part of the industry. And then we are also governed in terms of that governance. We do have to register any clinical trials ongoing on the South African National Clinical Trial Registry. So if you're trying to understand what's happening in the landscape, it is quite a useful resource to review. In terms of studies that fall in the diagnostic or more in the real world evidence arena, so we typically we would advise from our understanding and expertise that those studies would not require full approval from SAPRA, but would just need to be a notification where the primary approval will sit with the ethics committees or the IRBs involved. And then, we do have a number of other ministries or departments of health, and depending private site, would be that a Netcare, they would need to be also approvals at that level. And depending on, if it's in children, there may be some other approvals from different departments that are needed. So just really to ensure the patient safety from an ethics perspective. It's a really relatively well-defined process in terms of what's required from the protocol, the IB, and then our informed consent, and everything initially can be done in English, and later the patient-facing materials that are required translated into the relevant languages that the sites need, and that's just submitted as an updated notification. Obviously, there is also a level of sponsor indemnity required. In terms of how long this takes, so generally the ethics, you can submit every 2 weeks, and you can estimate between 8 to 10 weeks. It does depend on the committee, but on average, that's what we would guide. And for those IRBs where once a month submissions are done, then and you could expect approval in 10 to 12 weeks. So I mean, it is relatively well mapped out. I think some of the challenges are just more around the nuances for really diagnostic or device type of studies that we need to update some of the guidances with SAPRA, but I do know that's a work in progress. I think that's just my update from a South African perspective, and I hand back to you, Michelle.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sue. So we're actually going to move on to the next session of our short presentation. And I'm delighted to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Saurabh Kumar, who will talk around the important area of health economic data for your IVDs.
Thanks, Michelle, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone. So I'll just take you through the an important topic about how we drive the value through health economic data and what kind of modeling, health economic modeling that is being used from a lab test also. Given the fact that currently there is a focus on how to drive value in healthcare, and it's impacting all the aspects, whether it is pharma, whether it is devices, as well as the diagnostic lab tests. So in next few slides, I'll just take you through what kind of different tests which are done, which are different models which are there, what's the relevance, and what are the few things that need to be taken care of when we are doing a health economic modeling for the for lab diagnostic tests. So if you can just move to the next slide. Right, so what exactly health economics is? So it's basically we are trying to derive what's the value of one device or one test as compared to the other one. So whether it is one is better one or the other one. So if I take an example, RT-PCR tests or the RAT test, which one should I be doing? Should I be doing the RAT because it may be giving me quick results and also I'm able to take action and it may be of low cost? And or should I go for RT-PCR, which may have a high sensitivity, may be costly, but then I'm able to reduce the transmission of the disease. So where do I define, or where do I define the value for that? That's what would be a health economic model be providing us, that what may be a appropriate solution or appropriate test that can be used. Now, why it is needed? The reason is that the budgets are really limited. As we know, the healthcare costs are increasing a lot, and every stakeholder wants to have a value out of it. So they want to have a value for money. So on that perspective, if we can move to the next slide, what all kind of what all things that need to be taken care of? Now, when we are working from a health economic models, we have to see what are the costs. Now, what cost means? It can be a direct cost that the patient may have to go to the lab to get a testing done, or a doctor is doing a point of care test, a POC test. There the cost is there. Both things have to be taken into consideration when the patient is coming for a test from a test perspective. Then there are opportunity costs. The patient may have had gone for work rather than coming for test. What kind of a perspective it is? Is it from a patient perspective? So whether it's highly costly for a patient or not, if it is a out-of-pocket payment. From a payer perspective, if it has to be reimbursed, what's the cost is, and does a payer have an option to choose between two tests and see which is a better one from a value perspective. A provider, again, when the provider has to recommend a test, which one the provider should do it. And then from a societal perspective, that how it is impacting the entire society part of it. Like I mentioned, RT-PCR would be very costly. A RAT may be easy one, a less cost and quick to give results. So how it has an impact on the entire society budgets, that's important. So when we are doing a modeling part of it, it's extremely critical that we design which perspective are we looking at, because the results, the inference and the recommendations would differ based on the perspective that we take. From an outcome perspective, self-explanatory, it can be clinical. So if a test is highly sensitive, less specific, we'll have to have a different kind of recommendations or impact from a treatment perspective. If it is highly specific and less sensitive, different kind of implications. So, and the cost wise, it would have implications. Economic, cost wise implications again, and humanistic, societal. So when we are doing these tests, or when we are doing the health economic modeling part of it, it's very important that which perspective we take, what kind of cost we consider, and what's the outcome that we want to represent to, because the different stakeholders like the regulators or the providers or the or the FDA bodies, they would look at from their perspective rather than looking from a holistic perspective. So it's very important when we are approaching them. If you can move to the next slide. So I'll not go into details of it, but these are some key health economic models which are used to do the evaluation. So some are partial, where we are just looking at one test which is there and its impact. And then we have full economic evaluation, which would be a more intense and more detailed about comparing the two tests and then looking at which would be a better one based on my need. So from a partial perspective, you will have cost consequence analysis, cost outcome analysis, cost of illness, and full economic cost minimization, cost benefit, cost effectiveness, cost utility, and budget impact analysis. The details of these are there in the appendix, so we won't go into details, but I'll just on the next slide, I'll just take you through how to use them and when we use them, which tests. So if you can just move to the next slide. So it just tells me if I'm comparing two or more outcomes, I can do a full evaluation if both cost and outcomes are being assessed. If only the cost is concerned or the outcome is assessed, then I can do a partial one, dependingly what kind of comparison am I using. So this table actually gives a very nice overview of which would be a more appropriate model in what scenario. So this was more of a journalistic kind of a, I would say, view of health economic modeling. Coming to lab tests, if you can move to the next slide. There are certain specific things which needs to be taken care of when we are actually doing these kind of health economic models for the diagnostic tests. And one of the things that are there is the goals of the test. That for what am I doing it? Is it the preventive test? Is it for screening? Is it for diagnostic? And as we know, a test can be a preventive, a screening, or a diagnostic, and there would be a spillovers. For example, if I'm doing a genetic testing for diagnosing a breast cancer patient, now for that the test may be a diagnostic, but if I'm using the same test to screen the family members, that becomes a screen test. So there I have to be very clear what's my goal is for a testing perspective, because that would change again my recommendations and my evaluations, etc. Next is what's the setting and the location. So like we mentioned, if it is a sample collection, it may be a cheaper option because it can be done at home or it can be done at a nearby lab. But if it is a point of care kind of a testing, it may be a costly one because it may have technology, it may have cost of doctor or the physician or the nurse who is taking the test or doing the test. So that will have an impact. And same primary healthcare and the tertiary care. So if it is a primary healthcare center or a clinic, that would be less costly as compared to if I'm going to a tertiary center or an academic center, the cost would be higher. So it all depends where I'm taking the test. Then what's the time horizon? Now, when we ask for the time horizon, it's not only the time horizon of like when I do a test and that's all, but it's about how long the treatment is going on, because I may be using this test again and again, and this test may be having an impact on the overall cost of the treatment. So how it is actually helping me out to manage the cost of the entire process or entire treatment that is going on. In a short-term perspective, how quickly I'm able to diagnose it correctly. Again, I take an example of RT-PCR and the rapid antigen test. If I have to do a rapid antigen test first and then also go for RT-PCR, it doesn't solve me a purpose because I'm doing two tests and having incurring a cost twice. Rather than that, I can just do an RT-PCR and save on a cost. Now, do I need to do these two tests or do I not need to do these tests? These are kind of consideration that I would do when I'm doing a health economic modeling for a particular stakeholder or a geography. We can combine both of them because I may look at whether I am able to diagnose a disease quickly. That's first part. And then if I'm like for the COVID part, and if I am able to do this test on a regular basis during the time of the treatment and see how helpful it is for me to reduce the cost of the treatment. So it becomes a bit complex. So again, it depends. What's the need of the model? What's the question? What is the question that has been asked? And what kind of a output or a stakeholder I'm going to respond to. Last but not the least, the comparators. So like we know, when we are doing a testing, there will be algorithms, and the simple algorithm would be a doctor advises a test. The patient takes that test to a lab. The lab does it, then gives a response, a report. Now, this is kind of an algorithm, or the algorithms may exist within the testing algorithm itself. Now, it's very important when I'm comparing two tests. If the algorithms in both the tests are same, if the algorithms differ, my outcomes will also differ, or my results would also differ, right? So when we are selecting comparators, it's very important that at least if we are not knowing it, we are at least reporting it to the authorities that this test was taken, algorithm was this, and the test that we are comparing, the algorithm is this, so that at least there's a transparency in the system, and they are much better. How should I say? They are much more armed to actually make a decision of which one to recommend from a value perspective. So these 4 points are quite important to take care of when we are doing a health economic modeling for the tests. If you can just go to the next slide, that's the last one. So when it comes to the, it's just a summary of what we have said in the previous slide, but with more factors that when I am actually when I'm actually working as a health economist or on the model for a test, what all things matter. So from a design perspective, like I said, the time horizon, whether I'm looking at a short term or a long term, health outcomes, usually we look at the QALYs and the dailies. So basically, we look at how much impact it is able to make from an outcome perspective, or how much impact it is able to make from an adherence perspective. So what kind of an outcome am I looking at? Then estimating and the cost resources. So like I mentioned, what all cost will be involved location wise, by the travel of the patient, the technology involved, etc. And last but not the least, the affordability and the reimbursement, which is self-explanatory, that what kind of reimbursement systems exist, what would be the out-of-pocket payments, how much would be the impact on the government or the provider. So when I'm doing a designing of the model, these things I do take care into consideration. Also, when I'm reporting to as a result out of it, I do mention what kind of a target population I had taken, and what kind of what was my option, what was my how should I say, the target which I wanted. Was it a screening target? Was it a preventive target? Was it diagnostic? I take that into consideration. Setting and locations, I already mentioned it on the previous slide, that where is it, so that they are aware that this is not an apples to orange comparison, but this is apples to apples comparison when we have done such kind of a health economic models. Comparators, again, I did mention about this in the last one, that what kind of a comparators we are looking at, that needs to be taken care of. And the incremental cost and outcomes is basically what kind of a incremental cost that will get and what kind of an outcome. It's more of a value that if I am spending, say, $10, am I getting a value of $12 or not? Based on the incremental outcomes, based on the outcomes that I'm getting out of the results. So that is extremely important to be reported so that they are able to make a decision which test to be preferred as compared to the other one. So I think that's a brief about the health economic models that we do, and with some specific insights related to the diagnostic tests which are there and what things to be taken care of. I'll pass it on to Richa for literature review part of it.
Thank you, Saurabh. Hi, everyone. My name is Richa Goel. I work as a principal at IQVIA, and my roles and responsibilities majorly involve delivering scientific literature review. So the section that I'm going to cover today basically involves why do we need systematic review, what kind of robust methodology or technology that we follow at IQVIA. So if we go to the next slide, we will see that when we do performance evaluation for IVDs, it follows the entire life cycle of the device. Hence, the systematic reviews can be used for the following deliverables, including clinical performance report, scientific validity report, performance evaluation report, and post-market performance follow-up. So here comes the importance of the systematic reviews. Now, how do we do it? So when we see the next slide, we see that the approach or the methodology that is used for systematic literature review, it is as per laid down by Nice and Cochrane. So if I try and deep dive into the methodology, the first part includes the searches. The search question is prepared from various databases, including a predefined specified search criteria. After the search strategy is done, the abstracts are screened as per the inclusion-exclusion criteria, followed by the full text screening, and the particular data points are extracted. Then we do a step known as critical appraisal, which determines the quality of a particular study. And then finally, reporting part is done, which is then submitted to the client as a part of value evidence generation. Coming to the next slide. Now, what is the importance of systematic review? How it is different from a normal literature review? So it provides a very transparent evidence. It is reproducible, which means if I am doing a systematic review based out of research question sitting out of India, and if a person does the same sitting out of any other country or any other different environmental conditions, it would be the same till the time we follow the same search criteria. The results are pretty accurate because we search from a gamut of databases. We integrate all sorts of evidence, not only from various databases, but from grey literature as well. It focuses on a particular research question, and the results that are provided are in a very, very accessible form. Coming to the next slide. Here we show that we have a robust technology and platform enabled services. So we have access to a tool called Distiller SR, which helps us in increasing the productivity and the timelines and reducing the timelines of a particular systematic literature review. Other than this, we have access to OVID. We use many other macro enabled features as well to bring in efficiency in the process. Coming to the next slide. Here, I would like to talk about one of the case studies for a project that we recently completed. It was kind of a combination device used for SARS-CoV-2. So it was a combination device of medical device as well as IVD testing kit. We were commissioned to perform the systematic review, and we performed as per the PICOs and delivered results in form of Prisma and the robust review. So with this, I would like to thank you all for the attention. Andrew, over to you, please.
Thank you, Risha. And thanks to Dr. Kumar, Michelle, Brenda, and Sue for your wonderful presentations, and to the audience for your engagement as well. Sarah and Tanya, if we can go to the next slide, we'd like to open up the floor to perhaps a group discussion, if that's how you feel you'd like to proceed, or perhaps a Q&A if the audience have any questions they'd like to direct to any one of the IQVIA members who are on the call here today. Not only the speakers, but we have a few other faces that have joined us today. So feel free to raise your hands and ask any question you like.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. I would now open the floor to anybody that would like to ask questions. You can either type your questions in the chat box, or raise your hand and just ask your question. I'm going to put my camera off. Yes, Sarah, you can proceed.
Thanks, Tanya, and thank you for the presentations from all the speakers and for coordinating this all, Andrew. So I have a question for Sue, who's involved with clinical trials. Sue, thank you for giving us the regulatory aspects of clinical trials in South Africa, and I know we still have a long way to go to align clinical trials in IVDs and medical devices. But what is your experience around self-testing and clinical trials relating to self-testing, not only COVID, but other diseases? Have you got any perhaps insights around this and the way forward? Thank you.
I don't believe we've had any experience locally with that from a kind of approval perspective that comes to mind. Michelle, I'm not sure if you can think of anything globally that maybe reference.
Yeah, and maybe I can give perspective. We've run some studies in sub-Saharan South Africa with self-testing, and also globally. I think what we've actually seen really since the pandemic, it's had some positive consequences in research, and a lot has been around self-testing as well, where I think now is patients, participants, subjects have become much more engaged in self-testing as well. They've become more aware of it. So I think in general, across as a population, self-testing, I think, we're moving into that area of self-testing and point of care testing. What we're seeing in the studies we're running is that we have to engage the population for self-testing. Many of our studies may inform even human factor studies, just to even understand, do they understand the instructions for use? What we do in our studies is we look to see, can we even engage through telemedicine and, connecting to do remote training with the participants for self-testing. One of the things to keep the participants engaged, there has to be some, I spoke earlier about value. They have to have a perceived value to participate. And what we need to do in some cases is provide some form of, excuse me, stipend back to the participant, whether that's going to be some small token of a small monetary value, or access to information on the study, or contribution to an organization as well. We have to provide some value back to them as well and keep them engaged in the study. So I don't know, Sarah, if that's answered any of your question, or maybe opened up more questions, but I'm happy to discuss further as well if needed.
Yes, thank you. So that did respond to some of my question, but the other thought to perhaps get your insight as well is around the whole validation of the self-testing kits, and what is your experience, you know, if we don't have the insight in South Africa, what is the process like globally from validating these kits and making sure that they are kits of quality before they are rolled out to the public sector? Any insights around that perhaps from your side?
Yeah, and maybe just to understand, when you say to understand kind of the quality and the validation of the kit, do you mean from the manufacturer perspective, how the kit is developed and the quality around that? I didn't maybe fully understand just the context of the questions. My apologies.
Yeah, well, from a manufacturing perspective, as well as when we come to approval by a regulator, let's say, there are
Yeah.
requests for validation. I know we're heading towards looking at reliance models, but what is the impact on self-testing from a regulatory perspective? You know, and do you have some insights around that?
Yeah. I mean, what we see is that in all of these studies, generally they have to be a comparative in nature, that whatever we're validating and testing, that we're comparing to the gold standard test as well. So when we collect samples and specimens that are self-tested, we would also run the test on, I mean, the easiest example is, you know, kind of for COVID probably, is on the, you know, the PCR test as well. So we would run the test locally and run the test on a PCR test, on a PCR assay. And what we see is the regulators will set that you have to have a certain number of specimens that are positive controls as well to validate the validity of the test as well. So for example, we see like with the FDA is for COVID testing, they say you need to have at least 30 positive samples on the PCR assay to validate against the test that the manufacturer is developing.
Thank you.
Just
Okay.
add back, sorry, Sarah, I mean, it's really important that we do understand that landscape very closely. I mean, the way the evolution is happening from a trial perspective, we've been pretty successful with home health nursing being deployed in South Africa, you know, more moving away from the full site model, but in that more decentralized model. So, and we have a lot of, you know, tools to do electronic patient reporting of outcomes and that. So definitely that additional self-testing piece will need to come in quite clearly. But so far we have been able to deliver studies in that more decentralized model, and this, I guess, will be another component of that.
Great, thank you so much. Back to you, Tanya.
Thank you. Duncan, you have a question?
Yes, I do. And perhaps my question is to Dr. Kumar regarding, you know, there's been a lot of discussion in recent years of shift in reimbursement models, right? So shifting really from a fee for service to a fee for procedure or reimbursement based on procedure. And eventually what we hope will happen in the end, or what is kind of assumed to happen, is that we get kind of reimbursement based on outcomes. So obviously, real world data is important in terms of really understanding how those models will be reimbursed, especially on an outcomes based model. So the question is really regarding your view on the developments regarding moving towards outcome based reimbursement. Do we see this really in the context of South Africa with NHI? Is this something that would happen? What is the thoughts around private health insurance moving to this in the medium to short term? Just what is your view on the whole idea of shifting towards fee for procedure and fee for outcomes in the end?
Sure. Thanks, Duncan. So rightly said, I mean, till now, it was more on the case-based payment system. But now, as the market has realized that the outcomes differ by the treatments, and outcomes do have a much more impact on the budgets as well as the cost, there has been a move. I mean, I can mention about some of the insurance plans in India also, where they are actually looking at if the outcome is based on the outcome they are looking at, that if the outcomes are good, then and only then the payments are being done. And also, if you see, there is a AMNOG, which is there in Germany, where they actually look at, they would be approving a drug for a year, and then they look at a drug or an intervention for a year, and then they look at after 1 year what kind of impact has been there from an outcome perspective. And if the outcome has not been in line to what has been submitted at the time of it, the gap has to be paid by the organization. So I would say there is a push from the regulators as well as the payers that there has to be an outcome based kind of a payment system that should be there. What we feel as a, I mean, what I feel that outcome in a healthcare sector is quite complex, because, I mean, for an example, there may be an intervention which may be approved based on a certain endpoint, but these which may be a surrogate endpoint, but the gold standard endpoint after a few years may not be met. So where do we draw the line? That is something which is a complex system. Now, when we talk about the real data, that may help us to actually at least simulate once we have a huge amount of data that is there, that is spanning for years and with a huge volume of patients. That may help us at least simulate that what may be an outcome and may reduce the gap in, may reduce may help in actually making a decision of whether this intervention be able to meet a golden or the golden endpoint which is there for a particular disease. So to answer that, there is a push from an outcome perspective, and a lot of countries are using it nowadays, and they are looking at what kind of outcomes should be used. Complexity comes, what kind of outcomes should be used, and they would differ by the country, by the geographies, as well by the regulators and the insurance organizations. And thirdly, when it comes to the real world data, that may actually help us to make better decisions, because we will be able to see a very high volume of population which can be simulated and see what may be an impact in the future. So that's what my take is, but I hope that answers your question which you had.
And just to add, Duncan, as well, is, I mean, yeah, I fully agree with what Dr. Sarb is saying. And as a full industry, we're moving now more from value-based performance, volume-based performance to value pricing as well. And just want to highlight today, the NICE body in the UK are publishing a framework on real-world evidence, using real-world evidence for reimbursement. I just looked before coming onto the call to see was it available. It's not yet published. If you're interested, keep an eye open for it, because I think they're quite a well-established payer body, and many of the other HTA bodies also follow. So it'll be interesting to see what they're putting into place. They'll also be running a webinar today to launch this new framework as well. So that's the NICE.org, the UK body.
All right. Thank you very much. That I'll definitely keep an eye out for it. Yeah, and yeah, great. Thanks for the response.
Thanks, Duncan.
Thank you very much. Rajesh, I see that your hand is up. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the nice session. So I have one query. So just want to understand, so is there any kind of 510K clearance just like for US market? So it will be applicable for SALDA?
So, sorry, your question is 510 clearance in the US? I didn't quite understand the second part. Apologies.
So it will be the similar case with the SALDA device also. So just like for US market, we have some 510K pre-market approval, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm not familiar myself with what is required in South Africa, so I'll just have to come back to you. We'd follow up on that question and come back to you.
yeah, thanks, Michelle.
Okay.
And one more query I have. So how the SALDA will be, I mean, we have the regulatory authority SAPRA. So how it will be differing from EU IVDR? in terms of IVD?
Let's say we hope it's very different, because the EU, you know, IVDR is very, very complex as well. So yeah, we don't have insights yet on that. We're watching out, but yeah, I mean, feedback from, you know, manufacturers is it's quite challenging now with the new IVDR and the complexity and the upgrading of risk classification of IVDs. So it's only just came into effect earlier this year, but I think what we're hearing is that there are even a number of manufacturers maybe pulling their diagnostic tests from the market because of the additional requirements on evidence generation, as the diagnostics now have a higher risk classification. So hopefully not the same. The US market, I must say, is very favorable for, you know, developing diagnostic tests and bringing them into the market and using real world evidence. So let's hope it takes more of a US approach than a EU approach right now.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Is there any more questions at this point in time? And again, if there are questions that arise later on or after this meeting, you're more than welcome to send it on to Sarah, and Sarah can send it on to Andrew and his team, and they can respond to your questions afterwards. Andrew, thank you very much to you and the whole IQVIA team. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for all the information. I think it was very well received. We really appreciate all your time. Sarah, anything else from your side?
No, thanks, Michelle. Sorry, I've just let Michelle in. Thanks, Tanya. And thank you very much to the IQVIA team for all your inputs and your time and preparation for this session. We really appreciate it. And if we do receive any further questions, we will be in contact with you. Thank you very much again.
And once again, thanks to you, Tanya, and Sarah and the SALDA team, and for your members' engagement. We'll share the presentation, I suppose, later this afternoon for you to disseminate to your members. But once again, thanks very much for your time and allowing us to present to your members, and then to the IQVIA team. Thanks, guys, for all your hard work behind the scenes in putting this together.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
And then thank you to all the members for joining. We really appreciate your time and your participation in this meeting today. We will now conclude the meeting, and we are looking forward to seeing everybody in person in August at our general meeting and our celebration of 21 years. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and stay warm.
Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you.